You never forget the sound of metal under pressure, especially not at 3:04 a.m., when your gun safe explodes like a car crash in your living room. I was jarred awake by the echo, followed by a single voice piercing the night like a siren. "He's hiding weapons," she shrieked. "Call 911, now. He's got illegal guns." At first, I thought I was dreaming. But then I saw her, the unmistakable silhouette of Karen Delaney, our HOA president, in my ranch house, standing over my blown-open safe, waving her phone like it was a warrant. That safe wasn't just a safe. It was part of a federal monitoring system. A decoy, designed to look like it held rifles and ammo. What it actually held? Documents. The kind that never get scanned, never get emailed, and never leave a paper trail. I'd been safeguarding them for over 5 years, since the Bureau brought me in under a quiet agreement. But now Karen had tripped the failsafe. The moment she cracked the biometric seal with her hardware store crowbar and stepped inside my den, a silent alert went off at a secure server in Washington, D.C. And 45 seconds later, before she could finish her Oscar-worthy 911 monologue, a convoy of federal SUVs crested the ridge behind her. But let me rewind. My name is Cal Morgan. 51. Retired Navy cryptographer turned wildlife biologist. I live on a 120-acre ranch in South Creek Hollow, Texas, a sleepy patch of scrubland with more mesquite than neighbors. The ranch was my late uncle's, passed down to me under one condition: I'd keep it quiet, off-grid, and under no man's rule but the Constitution. Enter the HOA. They called themselves the South Creek Improvement Board, a fancy title for a group of bored suburbanites from the subdivision half a mile north. They built their stucco mansions on what used to be grazing land, then decided they wanted my property to match theirs. Karen Delaney, the president, had been gunning for me since the day I refused to attend her optional community welcome orientation. A former prosecutor turned self-help author, Karen believed in order, in rulebooks, and in public humiliation as a form of compliance. Her newsletter arrived every Friday in a gold-embossed envelope, always addressed to Cal Morgan, non-compliant resident. I ignored them. Until I couldn't. It started with letters, complaints about my fence not being visually harmonious. Then citations for noise pollution, citing my generator. Then came the fines: $250 for excessive dust from my driveway, $500 for keeping livestock in a residentially designated view corridor. And when I didn't pay, she escalated. I caught her on my game cams 3 times. Once walking the perimeter, clipboard in hand. Another time snapping photos of my truck. The third time, she was trying my front gate at 11:42 p.m. That's when I realized this wasn't about rules. It was about control. I filed reports. Sheriff's office shrugged. It's a civil matter, they said. HOA's got a lot of influence. I knew what that meant. Karen's brother-in-law ran the zoning board. Her cousin? A deputy. Her ex-husband? A county judge. But she didn't know me. She didn't know I'd once worked in cyber forensics for the Navy. That I still consulted for agencies most folks pretend don't exist. Or that my safe was part of an ongoing federal investigation into land deed manipulation, shell LLCs, and HOA fraud schemes operating across 7 states. So when I saw her standing over my safe, flashlight trembling, eyes wild as she called 911 claiming a domestic terrorist incident, I didn't rush to stop her. I sat in the shadows and watched. Watched her stumble through the emergency call, waving her phone toward the cracked open safe like it proved her case. Watched her rehearsed fear, her deliberate stammer. He's armed. He threatened me. I think, oh God, I think he's hiding something dangerous. And then I watched her turn, eyes wide, as the first SUV skidded to a halt at the edge of my drive, black as midnight, silent as ghosts. 15 seconds later, 2 men in tactical gear exited with military precision. Karen didn't scream. Not at first. Not when the red dot settled on her chest. Not when she was asked to drop the phone. Not even when she was zip-tied and read her rights under Title 18, Section 1001, false statements to a federal agent. She screamed when she saw who stepped out of the third SUV. Her husband. Or rather, the man she thought was her husband. Karen's scream cracked the still night like lightning across dry brush. It wasn't the scream of fear, it was betrayal. Pure, undiluted disbelief. "David," she gasped, frozen in place. What are you doing here?" The man who had, until 20 seconds ago, been her husband lowered his sunglasses, pulled out a badge, and calmly said, "David Langley. Federal Bureau of Investigation. Counterfraud Division." If you've never seen a woman's entire understanding of her reality collapse in 1 second, let me tell you, it's a rare, unsettling thing. Karen staggered backward, mouth opening and closing like a beached trout, eyes darting between him, the agents, the SUV, and me, still leaning in the shadows with a hand on my dog's collar. She looked at me like I had betrayed her. But I didn't say a word. That honor went to David, Agent Langley, who stepped forward, lifted a thick file folder from his chest rig, and tossed it onto the ground in front of her. The flap popped open. A sea of documents spilled out, tax filings, offshore account ledgers, vote falsification records, and about half a dozen forged HOA resolutions. "You've been under investigation for 5 years, Karen," he said. "Ever since your group's first dummy corporation used federal disaster relief funding to build emergency storage units that were actually spas and wine cellars. Your little break-in tonight? That's called a triggering event. It activated the final warrant." Karen shook her head, mouthing the word no over and over. But it wasn't denial. It was disbelief that she, the enforcer, the authority, the rule queen, was suddenly the one surrounded. And I'd waited 5 years for this. Let me explain. That safe she cracked? It wasn't just bait. It was a federal honeypot, part of an investigation I was embedded in after I discovered that the South Creek HOA, under Karen's leadership, was connected to a vast real estate laundering operation spanning multiple states. Fake fees, phantom violations, trumped-up assessments, used to squeeze homeowners out of properties which were then flipped via shell LLCs. How did I get involved? Simple. I caught one of their field agents photographing my deed from a drone, then matching it against a forged plat map. The next week, they sent me a special assessment invoice for $17,400. That's when I contacted my old Navy buddy at the Bureau. We built a plan. And part of that plan? Infiltrate. Which meant finding someone close enough to Karen to see the rot from the inside. Enter David, real name Langley. He'd met Karen at a leadership conference 3 years ago. She'd fallen hard for his clean-cut patriot vibes, not realizing he was recording every backroom conversation and private threat she issued like it was evidence, because it was. They married 6 months later. Now, as Karen sat zip-tied on my gravel drive, Langley knelt beside her with the kind of detached compassion only professionals have. "You should have stuck to the fines and gossip," he said. "You made it personal when you forged state-level flood zone documents to reclassify your neighbor's house and buy it at auction." She was shaking now. "You think anyone will believe this?" she hissed. Langley raised an eyebrow. "Oh, we don't need them to believe it. We have 742 gigabytes of evidence. Including," he turned toward me, "the backup drive she tried to Photoshop." And that's where the next layer unraveled. You see, Karen didn't just want power. She wanted proof she could destroy people. That's why she'd spent the past 6 months doctoring files, creating fake police reports, photoshopping images to make people look like they were hoarding firearms, running Airbnb scams, even fabricating fake text conversations to stir drama on Nextdoor. She'd made one fatal error. She tried to do it to me. 2 weeks ago, I found a copy of my driver's license edited into a scanned letter to the county zoning board. It claimed I was operating a weapons training camp on my property. The letter was clearly fake, wrong formatting, wrong stamp, but the signature was close. Too close. I ran the metadata. Guess whose IP address had touched the document? Karen's. Guess whose fingerprint scanner registered the download from the HOA office server? Karen's husband's. Langley had fed her a trail of fake breadcrumbs, a string of files loaded with trackable markers, and she fell for all of them. Every leak she distributed went straight back to federal hands. But the final blow? That came in the form of a USB drive Langley held up, dangling it in the moonlight like a fishing lure. This, he said, turning to the lead SWAT officer, contains all of it. The HOA's shell companies. The vote rigging. The fraudulent evictions. The financial documents masked under the name of a charitable trust. And her personal logbook, complete with plans to turn this ranch into a luxury retreat once the stubborn squatter was removed. Karen screamed then, lunging forward as if sheer outrage could reverse the night. You tricked me. You used me. Langley's voice was quiet. No, Karen. You used them. The families you evicted. The veterans you targeted. The retirees whose homes you turned into Airbnbs. I just followed the trail you left. By sunrise, South Creek Hollow wasn't a quiet town anymore. News choppers hovered like hornets above my property line. Satellite vans lined the dirt road for half a mile. Every camera lens was pointed at my ranch gate, and every reporter wanted one thing. The story of how an HOA president triggered a federal takedown by cracking a safe she thought held guns, but instead held the keys to a $50 million fraud empire. And there she was. Karen Delaney. In the back of an unmarked SUV. Head down, hands cuffed, makeup streaked with tears. The same woman who'd once marched through the neighborhood with a clipboard and a smirk, slapping violation tags on mailboxes and measuring grass blades with a ruler. Now she was wearing government-issued zip ties and being photographed from every angle. But the real storm hadn't hit yet. That came during the press conference. By 9 a.m., the county courthouse steps were packed. Agent Langley, now back in his real suit and badge, stood before a podium flanked by 2 U.S. attorneys and a digital display screen. Behind them? A slide that read, Operation Curb Appeal, Dismantling the HOA Fraud Pipeline. And then, the presentation began. Slide after slide showed the inner workings of a scheme no one in town had suspected. Karen and her executive board had created 12 dummy LLCs over 4 years. Each one represented a vendor used by the HOA, landscaping firms, pressure washing contractors, community wellness consultants. Except none of them existed. All of them funneled money to offshore accounts, real estate holdings in other states, and hush payments to anyone who threatened to sue. But what really blew this wide open, Langley said, voice calm over the clicking cameras, was a private citizen's willingness to say no. He gestured to me, where I stood off to the side in boots and a ball cap, trying to stay out of frame. Mr. Morgan's cooperation allowed us to track, monitor, and expose the mechanisms of coercion used by this HOA. From doctored violations to fraudulent tax assessments, this board used its authority to force homeowners out and profit from their displacement. A ripple of gasps ran through the crowd. Then Langley dropped the biggest bombshell yet. Among the evidence recovered were scripts used during HOA meetings to simulate fake emergencies, fire risks, noise complaints, even wellness checks. These were coordinated performances, designed to build legal records justifying forced compliance. In one case, he clicked to the next slide, a member of the board called Child Protective Services on a single mother after she refused to sign over an easement. Murmurs exploded into outright shouts. People were stunned. People were furious. And Karen? She was watching all of it live from a holding cell in the county jail. We found out later she tried to fake a panic attack for sympathy. Unfortunately for her, there was footage, real footage, of her smirking on her way into my ranch, crowbar in hand. That clip would later go viral on social media with the caption, HOA Karen cracks a safe and cracks a federal case instead. But that wasn't the only footage. Because as part of the investigation, I'd recorded every HOA visit to my property for the past 18 months. Every fake violation. Every creepy midnight perimeter check. Every time Karen called me a gun-hoarding squatter. And the Bureau had compiled the best of it into a 5-minute sizzle reel, yes, a sizzle reel, that played at the end of the press conference. It ended with a still image of Karen, waving her phone above her head during her 911 call, screaming about illegal weapons, just before the SWAT team tackled her. But here's the twist no one saw coming. Halfway through the Q&A, a woman in a sharp navy suit stepped forward. She was introduced as Sabrina Mendel, the interim president of the South Creek Homeowners Association. "We were shocked by these revelations," she said carefully, gripping the mic with both hands. "Karen acted without the knowledge or consent of the broader board. We will be conducting a full internal audit." Langley raised a hand. "Miss Mendel," he said, "we have you on audio approving the falsified voting packets for the March assessment increase." The courthouse exploded in noise. Sabrina's face went pale. She didn't even resist when 2 agents approached her and gently took her by the elbows. The fall of one woman had become the collapse of an entire board. 7 arrests. 2 in the crowd. 1 in the parking lot trying to drive away. And another, an accountant named Paul, caught live streaming from his car as he claimed he was being framed by deep state gardeners. The HOA didn't just lose credibility. It evaporated. By the following week, every mailbox in South Creek got a letter from the state attorney general's office. The HOA was being dissolved pending legal review. All operations suspended. All fines voided. All lien threats canceled. And for the first time in a decade, the people of South Creek Hollow were free. But the story wasn't over. Because 2 days after the press conference, I received a small brown envelope. No return address. No postmark. Inside was a photo, printed on old-school film paper, of Karen. Smiling. In front of a different ranch. In a different state. Next to a different husband. I stared at the photo. It was grainy, a little faded around the edges, like it had been developed at a pharmacy in 1997. But there was no mistaking her. Karen Delaney, in a yellow sundress, standing beside a barn I didn't recognize, holding hands with a man who wasn't Agent Langley. A different ranch. A different husband. A different life. On the back of the photo, in blocky all-caps Sharpie, was a single line. Circle Pines, Idaho, 2016. I turned the envelope over. No return address. No fingerprint smudges. Clean, professional. Like someone who knew how to leave nothing behind. But there was something tucked inside the fold, a folded sheet torn from a South Creek newsletter. I unfolded it. It was a section I'd seen 100 times before. From the president's desk. A wordy, self-congratulatory column where Karen would usually ramble about shrubbery height or the moral decay of off-white curtains. But this one, dated exactly a year ago, read differently. I hadn't noticed it before. It started innocently enough. Gardening tips. Safety reminders. But then, buried near the end, was a sentence that made my skin crawl. As always, we protect our property values through compliance, cohesion, and continuity, because the roots of a strong community must match the ones in Boise, Flagstaff, and Savannah. That line meant nothing to most people. But I'd seen phrasing like it before. In cryptography. It was a code. I called Langley. He didn't answer. 2 hours later, a black SUV pulled into my ranch drive. Not the Bureau vehicle I recognized. Not local law enforcement either. It was Langley, but with a new badge this time. "You're not going to like this," he said, stepping out and motioning for me to walk with him. "You thought South Creek was the whole op. It's not." Turns out, Karen was part of a much bigger machine. A network of high-level HOA seeders, operatives who embedded themselves into new developments, hijacked HOA boards through charm, intimidation, and falsified paperwork, and then implemented the exact same 3-phase model. Compliance phase, use rules to build trust and demonstrate control. Extraction phase, begin leveraging fines and violations to apply financial pressure. Acquisition phase, target vulnerable homeowners, seize assets under legal pretense, and route properties through shell companies. The same formula had been identified, almost word for word, in 11 other communities across 6 states. Boise, Flagstaff, and Savannah. I asked. Test sites, Langley confirmed. Karen was one of their best. Ran all 3 under different names. In Idaho, she was Julia Kessler. In Arizona, she was Dr. Karen Ross, a wellness consultant. Savannah. She ran a short-lived book club called Women of Authority, which was really a recruitment funnel. She's not just a fraud, I muttered. She's a playbook. Langley nodded grimly. But now we know what we're looking for. And your photo just gave us proof she was operating long before we caught her in South Creek. That evening, Langley left with the photo and the newsletter. Said the code phrase was part of a rotating syntax the Bureau had just cracked the day before. Each HOA had its own embedded trigger phrase, innocuous to the average resident, but a call sign to other embedded operatives. That's when I started to wonder. What if South Creek wasn't a mistake? What if I wasn't a lucky catch? What if Karen picked my ranch because she knew what I was hiding? Langley and I hadn't talked about that night yet. The safe. The documents. The real reason I'd been asked to house those records. But one detail haunted me. The night Karen broke in, she went straight to the safe. Didn't search. Didn't hesitate. She knew where it was. Which meant someone told her. The betrayal came 2 days later. I was on my porch, sipping coffee and watching the dust settle after the last of the news vans finally left, when my gate buzzer went off. It was her. Sabrina Mendel. The interim HOA president. The one who had been arrested during the press conference, but somehow walked free 2 hours later with a quiet apology from a junior prosecutor. She wore a windbreaker now, not the usual suit. Carried nothing. No clipboard. No phone. I know what you think, she said quietly through the gate. I said nothing. But I'm not part of Karen's network, she continued. I'm part of the one that hunts them. That got my attention. She pulled something from her jacket. A badge, not the Bureau. Not the Marshals. Department of Housing and Urban Counterfraud Division. I was planted in South Creek to monitor Karen's escalation patterns. But Langley jumped the gun when she cracked your safe. He was supposed to wait another month. See where she funneled the documents. See who her handler was. Handler? I opened the gate. You're saying she wasn't the top? She never was, Sabrina said. She's just a node. The real operation? That's buried deeper than anyone wants to admit. Including your old Navy friends. Then she leaned in, voice low. Did you ever wonder why your safe had 2 layers of encryption? My blood ran cold. I had decrypted the surface level, the financials, the shell companies, the local fraud. But I'd never cracked the second tier. It required a code I didn't have. Until now. Sabrina handed me a card. Thin. Metallic. Like a hotel key coated in matte black. 1 swipe, she said. Use it at midnight. Not before. Not after. I stared down at it. It had a single number etched on the back. Number 1783. And then she turned and walked away without another word. I didn't sleep. Midnight approached with a weight that felt almost biblical. That little black keycard sat on my desk like it was humming, though I knew it wasn't. I'd been around enough encrypted systems to recognize psychological warfare when I saw it. And this? This felt like the last door before something big. I made coffee I didn't drink. Fed the dog twice without realizing. Rewatched the footage of Karen's arrest as if maybe, just maybe, she'd dropped a hint about what was coming. Nothing. At 11:57 p.m., I walked to the safe. The same safe Karen cracked open like a fool. But she only made it through the shell. The gun safe disguise, the decoy documents. She triggered the tripwire, sure, but not the deeper failsafe. The one Sabrina had hinted at. I knelt, slid the key card into the hidden panel behind the biometric lock, and waited. It didn't beep. It pulsed, blew once, then again, and again. 3 pulses. Then silence. And then? The back of the safe, a second wall, receded 2 inches. Inside was a flat, dustless case. Black. Seamless. Almost ceremonial in its precision. I opened it with 2 fingers, half expecting radiation or a glowing orb or a note that said run. What I found was worse. Photos. Names. Maps. Schedules. A full dossier on Operation Hearthlight. That name meant nothing to me until I started reading. Operation Hearthlight was the real plan. The nationwide HOA conversion program. A private public-pilot initiative designed originally to stabilize suburban communities after the 2008 housing crisis. But somewhere along the line, probably around 2013, it was hijacked by a rogue group of developers, attorneys, and real estate investors. Their strategy? Create friendly HOA structures. Offer incentives to developers. Then gradually turn enforcement power into profit channels. Target isolated homeowners. Use vague language and psychological pressure. Fabricate infractions. Seize property via quiet title suits. Flip to shell buyers. Repeat. They weren't just criminals. They were organized. And the worst part? They were sanctioned. Originally, the very first seed money for these HOA expansions came from a quietly passed infrastructure bill, one with a footnote about community integrity testing. That bill was co-authored by a senator who, according to the files, now owns 8 properties in 3 of the target zones. South Creek Hollow was one of 27 active test zones, each with its own Karen, each with a Langley, or someone like him, embedded too late. Each one feeding data up the chain to someone higher, someone whose name wasn't listed, but whose initials were stamped on a memo marked. Phase 3, conversion begins Q2 2026. That's less than a year away. I sat back on the floor, the weight of it pressing into my chest like a boot. I wasn't just the guy who caught one HOA crook. I was the guy holding the black box no one was supposed to find. At 12:37 a.m., my satellite phone rang. Sabrina. You opened it, didn't you? Yes. A pause. Then you need to leave. What? There's a window, she said. Roughly 12 hours. After that, if the file's not offline, permanently, there will be a wipe. A wipe? Not a hack. Not a bug. A strategic blackout. Systemic. DNS scrubbed. Backups corrupted. Witnesses discredited. Or disappeared. And that's when I heard it. In the distance. A low, mechanical rumble. Black SUVs. Not bureau. Not local. No plates. 4 of them. Cresting the ridge the same way the real ones had the night Karen cracked the safe. But this time, they weren't here to arrest her. They were here for me. Epilogue. I didn't die that night. I made a choice. I copied the files onto 3 encrypted drives. I sent one to Langley, one to my cousin who worked for an investigative podcast, and one to a private server owned by a group I trust. Then I burned the original safe contents in my fire pit after rigging a decoy for anyone who might come snooping. Sabrina disappeared. Langley got reassigned. Karen? Still in custody, barely. But her trial keeps getting delayed, and no one's allowed to interview her. South Creek Hollow? Now a legend. Folks come by, whisper about the HOA that got the feds called on them. Kids take selfies at the ranch gate like it's a landmark. I play along. But some nights, when the wind shifts just right, I swear I can still hear the crowbar against metal. The safe clicking open. And Karen's voice echoing through the dark. He's hiding something. She was right. I was. But now the world knows. And the next time someone like Karen tries to weaponize a neighborhood, they'll have to face the truth first. Because the safe didn't hold guns. It held the reckoning. Like what you just heard? Drop a comment. Share your HOA horror story. And hit that follow button, because next time, trust me, you don't want to miss what happened next.